And now for our next guest, we have Adora Winquest, who has just finished writing a fantastic book. She sent me an advance copy, and I'm excited to dive into it. It's a field that my wife also has a lot of familiarity with. I didn't yet share that with you, Adora, but without stealing your thunder, welcome to the show, and tell us, what is going on, what do you do, and what book have you written?
Thank you so much. Well, first off, David, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm delighted, especially as someone that was born and raised in New York, albeit upstate. It's always beautiful to commune with someone from the city. So ultimately, I have just published a book. My publisher is in London, wonderful group called Aeon Books. And the book title is Detox, Nourish, Activate, Plant and Vibrational Medicine for Energy, Mood, and Love.
Well, hold on. Say that again. Say that again. Let the people, let that resonate, because it's a mouthful. And it's important.
It is a mouthful. It's called Detox, Nourish, Activate.
That's the big, that's what it says on the cover. Detox, Nourish, Activate. And then the subtitle, then the next part of the title is?
And the subtitle is Plant and Vibrational Medicine for Energy, Mood, and Love. But coming back to the Detox, Nourish, Activate, those letters D and A are really indicative of the essence of the book, which is all about healing at the DNA level and how we can transform our lives from any of the challenges that we've experienced, because we all have experienced adversity in our life. And some may view that as traumatic or trauma or just challenges, right? But this book has a wonderful guide, if you will, to be able to use the alchemies of plant and vibrational medicine, specifically essential oils, herbs, meditation, nutrition, and crystals and crystal healing, to be able to bring balance and healing and harmony to our being. And I think one thing that's really important and that hasn't been done in this book before is that it encompasses not just our physiological nature, which is imperative to address for sustainable healing, but also our psycho-spiritual aspects of being, right? Our emotions, our thoughts, and our spiritual natures. Although I always like to make the point that the book isn't just for those that are spiritually inclined. It's for anyone that's looking for better energy, better mood more consistently, and deeper experiences of being able to give and receive love. And I think ultimately one thing that comes from that kind of stepping stone philosophy is that ultimately it's about optimizing well-being, health, and coming to that place of peak performance, right? Whether we're looking at that from a relationship perspective, or our career, or our finances, or our overall health and vitality. So there's really something for everyone in that regard.
I was raised in the type of family that didn't embrace alternative medicine. And now I live in the type of family where my partner, my wife, is a nutritionist, an herbalist, and an acupuncturist. And she has prescribed for us and for our child homeopathies, and you know, and we do lots of herbal remedies. And
I love it.
Having this, you know, my relationship and being exposed to that, I can see how arrogant Western medicine is from a different perspective. And it's such an interesting debate right now, especially with all these vaccine conversations. I was quickly vaccinated. She was not jumping up and down to be vaccinated. She's gone to med school. It meant more to her that the vaccines weren't peer reviewed and she was pregnant and all those things. But without jumping into that exact conversation, I want to first and foremost say that health is the most important thing. I think there's a lot of investment gurus who talk about this and say the best thing you can ever invest in, not Bitcoin, not the stock market, is your own happiness and health. The return on investment is astronomical. And I mean that not just because I feel good, but it's true. The number one return on investment I get in any dollar I put out there is the dollars I spend on my business. I mean, that's how I, pay my mortgage and pay my bills. But, adding to that, I think that you talk about PTSD, you talk about ways to get peak performance. You talk to me a little bit about your journey. What is it that people who are arrogant in their approach to what you're talking about are missing, and why are they missing it?
I think that's a really great and profound question, because ultimately we don't know something until we know it, right? If we think of horses and racing, right, and blinders, when we have blinders on, it just means that we don't see the expansive view, right? Our vantage point is much more narrow. And so when we can educate ourselves with the wealth of interventions, particularly that are available from the natural world, that if you dig deep enough, there is a profound amount of scientific research, particularly for essential oils, for herbalism, for meditation, for these many varied aspects of complementary medicine. And yet we just don't know that much about it here in the West. When we look back at some of the other cultures, these alternative medicines from the natural world have been part of daily practice, from everything from rituals to physical health and well-being. And so there's so much we can learn from these ancient philosophies that I like to kind of talk about in a very modern way. And yet there's historically so much information out there. One of the things that I think is so profound and such a tool or intervention for people right now, especially after just coming back from Manhattan and New Jersey a few weeks ago, and the energy there is very tangible in terms of people's anxiety, of the fears. Even one of the women that attended one of the book events talked about the waves of PTSD that are just coming through the city. And it is, it's palpable. Especially from my perspective, because I've been out of that for the past few years now, right? And living more in the country here in North Carolina, so to speak. But it was really profound for me to come back to the city and connect and be able to talk about some of these opportunities that we have to curate our environment, to work to co-create our experience of reality. And one of the things that I talk so much about, and of course this has been part of my work for over 20 some years, is the powerful use of essential oils, which is the most potent form of plant medicine. And that when you have the right essential oils that you can inhale for about 30 to 45 seconds, because of the close proximity between the nose and the brain, but specifically the amygdala and the limbic center that regulates so much of our physiology, but specifically mood, memory, and emotion, you can literally transform how you feel in the moment. And, think about that. What a game changer that is, that somebody can have something in their hands to be able to roll on, breathe in their briefcase, in their pocketbook, like a TSA approved size, so they can travel with it and not only shift how you feel in the moment, but then that becomes a stepping stone effect to be able to shift the trajectory of your emotional response in the future to stress, right? Which is ever present, right? And that's not going to change, whether it's from the internal perspective or the external perspective. But when we can have something to be able to harness our inner resources, right, and to be more self-responsible in that regard, it's incredibly empowering.
So I want to ask you just two questions, because we don't have a ton of time, but you touched on two things I can't not ask follow-up questions about. So the first one is, I know that you talked about some very serious buzzwords for somebody who's coming from what we might consider an alternative place. You said things like DNA. You said things like PTSD. You said things like amygdala. These are very specific Western constructs. I mean, okay, is DNA a construct? Well, yes and no. It really exists, and we know what it looks like. But to be honest with you, 100 years ago, DNA was much more mystical and woo-woo than, echinacea, which you could very well see. And nobody had ever heard of Watson-Crick DNA double helix, And so it seems like your approach to health and wellness, while you're seeking a broad palette for answers, is very much speaking to modern society.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to be able to intertwine these more ancient philosophical doctrines or esoteric philosophies, or even psycho-spiritual dynamics, which are so profound in terms of us garnering a better understanding of who we are and why we are the way that we are, right? Based on our past experiences and based on, looking at our DNA as simply our generational relationship and what's passed down generationally, right? And so that gives us, I think, a really incredible palette to be able to paint the life that we've always dreamt of, right? And it takes personal commitment to that, right? And being able to really look at ourselves with the blinders off. So
I have a theory, a wild theory, and a follow-up I want to ask about that, which may or may not make the cut, but we'll see. Okay.
Okay.
Here's the other question I had, and then I have one other after that. So you had mentioned stress, and why is stress something that, especially, and I think I mean now I'm 40, and actually I'm 41, and I had stopped counting, but I never thought stress was a real health issue. I just thought people talked about that. I didn't think that was real, like a thing. Now I know not only is it real, but it is profound. That stress is next to diet one of the most important elements of your health and wellness profile. But what an expert like yourself, I mean, I just know I should try not to be stressed while living, the self-employed real estate broker's life in, Manhattan.
Sure.
I'm doing my best. What does stress, how do you relate to stress? What is it? How does it evidence itself in people you work with and yourself, and why do we need to combat it? What does it do? What's wrong with stress? Why shouldn't I care? Shouldn't I be stressed?
Well, I think this is such a profound and germane question right now, an area for people to dialogue more about. One of the things that you'll find in my book is that it talks about the adrenal system. And our adrenal system that sits atop the kidneys is so profoundly connected to our, not only our stress response, and then our compounded experience from not only a physiological perspective, but a mental and emotional perspective as well, responding to stress. So the adrenal system is basically what when we talk about being in fight or flight, right? And so what happens when we're stressed out? We're stressed because we have some anxiety about perhaps the future or the next moment. And that stress or worry takes a toll on not just our emotional sense. And that's something we can see often, right? When someone that you care about is affected by stress, you can usually see it either from their emotional response, or from their mental response. Maybe their thinking is a little bit more clouded. Maybe they're more sensitive emotionally. But from a cellular perspective, our cells respond to stress. And our cells, even our DNA, responds to our mental and emotional experience of all of the stressors in life, whether it's related to our family environment, to our work environment. Financial is one of the biggest stressors. And so what happens when the body is in a prolonged period of fight or flight, it starts to produce excess amounts of cortisol. And so people start to then feel more fatigued, right? You can get a burst of energy from having an emotional reaction to something, but then a fatigue is often the next step or the precursor to that. And, one of the things right now that people are talking about is adrenal fatigue and what that means, right? From both acute and chronic levels of stress. And the truth is that I believe that every person, over the age of 7 has some degree of adrenal fatigue because of the acute and chronic stress that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Does that affect your immune system?
It affects your immune system, absolutely. The more stress and the more the adrenal system gets taxed from the stress, unfortunately, the immune system comes down, and then we become much more susceptible to physiological imbalance, right? Whether it's a cold or a flu or other more serious disease processes. And so this is why the regulation of our stress response and building emotional resilience is such an imperative aspect and key to our well-being, to our peak performance, and to the way that we relate with not only ourselves, but everyone in our world, right?
I mean, I think we could talk a lot about this. I can't wait to read the book cover to cover. And I had the one last follow-up question, but I know this now to be true, but stress really makes you sick, and you can get a fever easily from being stressed. I mean, and you notice that here in New York City, we're exposed to all the baddies. What gets you is feeling bad about your life, and then they get you. It's not that they're not there. They're there.
Exactly.
And
that is so brilliant. Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, if you are wanting to have peak performance in your personal life, at home in any way, shape, or form, stress is obviously going to not make it possible if you have the type of professional stress that a lot of people in certain types of jobs have, in tech and finance. You're sacrificing something else oftentimes. It's not just your health and wellness, but it's your vitality. And,
absolutely. Our emotional health and well-being is connected to every aspect of who we are, right? Relationships, business, family, even our bank balance, right? Because we know when we don't feel good, that becomes a spiral downward, and our decision making.
Ice cream.
Yeah. Carbohydrates, bread, so many things, right? And so feeling good is how we create more experiences of benevolence in our lives and in our relationships.
Benevolence, such a brilliant term. So here's my off the wall idea. So I don't really believe, people are going to think this is crazy. I don't believe in evolution the way it's taught. I believe that what science is showing now isn't that there was some sort of infinite amount of options, but that in our lifetimes, in any living being's lifetime, we affect our own genes, and that's how and I sense that you picked up on this. And one thing that my son, who's 4 months old, I've noticed about him, he's incredibly photosensitive. He sleeps with his eyes closed. And one thing that I did my whole entire life was study painting. And I feel like I must have affected my own genetic code, that I think I'm planning on him to be a really good viewer of things. I'm hoping he can really use his eyes to a high degree. And I tell you, I was in the San Diego Zoo and I saw this big snake that looked so much like the jungle floor. And I just thought to myself, does it make more sense that there was infinite rainbow of snakes and all of the other ones succumbed to, eagles? Or did it make more sense that there was sort of a give and take, that this chameleon-like creature figured out a way to look like the ground? It wasn't just luck. It wasn't just genetic mutation and then it. So I know that's maybe not where the mainstream is, but when you talk about healing your DNA, is any of that sort of along those?
I love it. I completely agree. And especially, just as a snippet to consider this, that in each cell of your body, and there's trillions of them, is your DNA, right? It's imprinted within each cell. And ultimately, that includes intelligence, information, right? And it also includes every experience you've ever had since the moment of conception, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. If that isn't enough of a miracle, the same applies within each of your cells to every experience your mother has had and your father has had, and their mothers and their fathers. So we have this infinite, not only wisdom within us, but also potential that's really calling for us to harness the power of this moment, the power of our intention for transformation, for evolution, right? And for elevation, ultimately, of our conscious awareness of who we are in the world and what that looks like, how that relates to everything around us.
Detox, nourish, and activate.
Yes.
It just made sense to me.
Yeah.
Adora, thank you for the book. I can't wait to read it, and I want to circle back with you after I have. Thank you for joining the show. And where can we find your book?
So you can find it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, also on AdoraWinquest.com, where you can buy a signed copy, and also with my publisher, aeonbooks.co.uk, for any of your listeners that might be overseas.
Yeah, forget these Amazon. AdoraWinquest.com. We heard it here, AdoraWinquest.com. And Adora, thank you so much. I really appreciated this. My wife's going to love this one. And so will I. Did I?
Such a pleasure. Thank you,
My
David.
pleasure. And I already feel a little bit less stressed.
Awesome. My job is done for the day.
A little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.